Crossed into the net by Kylian Mbappé.
Oh, Benyera, beautifully done.
Cornet finds Dembele. The first touch is good. The second is deadly.
Neymar still. Oh my word, what a goal.
Golovin. Lovely finish. Ajax delivery. Guendouzi's header.
Here's an opportunity, Sanchez.
Outrageous goal from Gael Kakuta. Play it again. And Dolberg. Messi again. This time maybe Messi's done it.
Hello and welcome everyone to the latest episode of Beau Jeu, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about Ligue 1, delivered straight into your personal listening device in podcast form every Monday from your dedicated team of experts. And we're here to break down another spectacular and perhaps decisive weekend of Le Championnat, week 31 of the season, which shall be known from now on as La Journée Internationale des Vitinhas, as both of Ligue 1's Vitinhas netted their first ever goals in Le Championnat this weekend. The wait for those goals was at times agonizing, as some may think the start of this pod is as well. So without any further ado, I'm delighted to say we have a full house today. I'm your host, Robbie Thomson, and I'm joined by Ligue 1 commentator Andreas Evagora. Andreas, how was your weekend? I'm pleased to hear, because I was sitting at home watching the game and I heard your voice, so I realized that at least you weren't on strike.
No, I wasn't. Unfortunately, I was covering a match where the technical crew were on strike, which makes things very difficult, but we got through it and it ended up being a very good game, which we're going to talk about later, and a busy weekend.
Absolutely, and we are going to talk about that wonderful French penchant for striking as well, because we know it's been in the news and it finally got to football, so now we can talk about all our love-hate relationship with striking in France. And what better person to go to next than Baptiste Reynaud, our very own Frenchie on the pod. He left France. I'm not sure if strikes were one of the reasons why you left, Baptiste, to run Le Classique podcast from London, but that's where you are. How was your weekend?
Great, Robbie. Thank you. Just a lot of good football on show in Ligue 1 and got away with a 15-minute strike. Didn't damage my viewing, so all good.
Excellent. And only a Frenchman could be so appreciative of having his football hampered by striking technicians. But last, but certainly not least, Jonathan Johnson, who covers all things bleu, blanc, rouge for CBS Sports Golazo. And JJ, it was a big week for CBS Sports Golazo, I think, as well, with the new football channel opening. And I guess that means more work for you on French football, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. No shortage of work to be done, and obviously following Nice's adventures in the Europa Conference League as well. I think we're all invested in that story of France fighting for its place in the coefficient ranking. And fingers crossed, no more strike action from French teams in Europe in the future.
That's a low blow, suggesting that could have been the case in the past. It is great to see Nice, the minnows of France's European adventurers this season, going all the way into the quarterfinals of the Conference League. Don't forget, if you're on Twitter, you can follow the official Ligue 1 _ENG for English Twitter channel, Ligue 1 _English. And on the email, send us in your questions here. Any questions, comments you may have, or later to answer the Déjà Who for your chance to win a Ligue 1 jersey. Email us at ligue1podcast@gmail.com. Obviously, if you're listening to us now, you've found us on your favorite podcast platform. So make sure you subscribe, follow, recommend, and share. Now, round 31 was hugely anticipated, not least because Lens had chicotéed Paris in the north of France earlier this season. And many neutral observers thought it might happen again, not least because last week a huge story broke involving PSG coach Christophe Galtier, who was accused of racism while at his former club, OGC Nice. So I'm going to come to you, JJ, for a little bit of a wrap-up of what happened and more the fallout of what happened, because last week a couple of journalists, French journalists, one Romain Molina and the other Daniel Riolo, on a late night every evening talk show on French radio, revealed that they had come across an email by former Nice sporting director Julien Fournier, which was sent to Dave Brailsford, who was the head of Ineos at the time and sort of overseer of all things Ineos and Nice, their sporting family, which includes cycling and yachting and various other interests. This email from Julien Fournier was sent to his bosses then at Nice saying, look, I've just had a meeting with John Valovich Galtier, who is the stepson of Christophe Galtier, who was coach of Nice at the time. And then Christophe Galtier followed the son, John Valovich Galtier, into the room. And basically, Julien Fournier says he was asked to try and recruit some white French players because there were too many, and this is in a nutshell, too many Muslims in the side that would be practicing Ramadan, which would affect the sporting performance of the side. That's one thing. Then there's also the other side of that argument of what was said allegedly by Christophe Galtier and his stepson, adopted son, Jan Valovich Galtier, that the team he had, that the squad he had, did not reflect the city of Nice, did not reflect the values of Nice. And when Christophe Galtier went out to a restaurant in the city of Nice, the people, the restaurant were saying, what is this team? This is not us. This team doesn't represent us. The intonation being that this does not represent the white Frenchmen of Nice, French men and women of Nice, and that there was a disconnect between the people, the supporters of Nice Football Club, and the team itself. Now, that's what exploded into the scene in midweek. Christophe Galtier then immediately came out and said, I'm shocked and horrified by these accusations. There's no foundation to them whatsoever. A lot of people, including players that played under him, including someone like Burak at Lille, a Turkish Muslim, practicing Muslim, of course, former coaches, former teammates, everyone saying that this is ludicrous accusations. JJ, I'll come to you. That's essentially what's happened. What's the next step? I hear the police have gone to Nice to try and dig into computers and find any more proof of this, because the accusations are very, very serious in France, as they are anywhere in the world, of course. And did it have any effect on Christophe Galtier? Will it have any effect on his future at Paris Saint-Germain?
Yeah, never a dull moment in French football. I don't think a week can go by without some sort of controversy sort of exploding, onto the scene. I think, did it have an impact on Christophe Galtier going into this game? Certainly. We know that Christophe Galtier has been quite embattled for the last, month or so now, since PSG went out of the Champions League, went out of the Coupe de France as well. There were reports before all of this surfaced that he basically had the Nice match away and the Lens match at home to essentially save his job up until the end of the season, because it's already considered kind of a foregone conclusion that he won't be PSG manager, from this summer. Obviously something like this is going to make that, a lot more difficult for him to remain in charge of PSG beyond the end of the season, you would assume. And also, despite whatever might come out next, I think that Galtier is going to probably have to fight quite hard, in order to maintain this deserved image that he's built up over the years as a fantastic coach, within the French game. I think it speaks volumes to his impact, on French football over the last 10 years or so, that so many people will be willing to, come out and speak out in defense of him. Probably also quite damning as well, for somebody like Julien Fournier, that the man who hired him, Eric Roy, who's currently boss of Brest, came out and actually spoke very honestly, very frankly about him, and said that he wasn't surprised that he might have been sort of the source of this leaked email. Obviously, that's a lot of speculation at this moment in time. But you did mention that the authorities have gone to Nice's stadium to start to dig through the computer files and everything, and it sounds like this is something that is going to continue to move at quite high speed, and we may well have some clarity on it in the near future. But to see the way that it's snowballed is quite staggering. And that's me speaking in 2023, when these kind of stories explode quite frequently. Across all different kinds of topics, not just football. And I think it's quite saddening as well, to sort of hear that, Galtier's personal details were kind of shared on social media He received reams and reams of phone calls and messages threatening him and his family, to the point where he had to be put under a security detail after that. So, this has obviously, really, exploded and snowballed massively in just the space of a couple of days. And it's difficult at this moment in time to sort of see a way that, Galtier probably doesn't have to take some time out of the game, away from the game. You'd imagine that once PSG start the title, which, let's face it now, after that victory over Lens and the victory in Nice as well, is, just a matter of time. But very, very, very shocking to have covered as a journalist. And something else that I would add that I think maybe gets underplayed in all of this is that there was a mini controversy when Galtier took PSG to Nice last weekend and won. There was some, unsavory chants from the Nice fans and banners that were put up in the crowd. And it kind of feels like that was what kind of lit the fuse on all of this that kind of exploded a couple of days later.
We will talk about the football match as well. Don't worry, we are here to talk about the football as well. But Baptiste, before we do, there's so many tricky elements in this, not least that French society has this long history of involvement in North Africa. Further down, I mean, we're not going to rewrite the history of French colonialism or its impact on modern day football. But I think there are elements of this because we've seen on the big sports show Canal Plus on the weekend where a couple of the journalists were saying, it's not racism. He's not saying we can't have too many Muslims in the side, or this is purely talking sporting. If you don't eat all day, it's harder to play a football match in the evening. Samir Nasri came out and said, you just can't say it. Look at Karim Benzema, the best player in the world at the moment, who does this. There's a history of players, and you don't have to say it, because if the coach doesn't want to play a player because they're not performing, they don't play. You don't have to say why, and you don't have to say no more Muslims full stop in my team, or let's put a limit on it. And when I say put a limit on it, does anyone else think that just reminds us all of Laurent Blanc, another old school type coach going back to when he was France head coach and saying, we've got too many dual nationals. We've got too many. And then to say it that way is one thing, and then to go on and say we've got too many big, strong, tall, broad-shouldered, coloured players coming through our ranks who, once they don't qualify for the France team, then go and play for Guinea or Cameroon or Tunisia, their second national colour, and that we need to put quotas and have only French people coming through national academies. This, again, was a huge blow-up and was one of the huge factors of why Laurent Blanc was then removed from the France national team job. Baptiste, as a Frenchman overseas watching this from afar, how do you read what's happened in the last week, 10 days?
Just, with sadness and sort of predictable sadness. I think if you're looking at the population that's been marginalized historically in France, it's people of North African descent, whether they're immigrants or French nationals. And even more so over the last 20, 25 years, people of the Muslim faith, I think, have been marginalized. So to see this sort of debate going on in a country like France, in the way France has been voting over the last 10 or 12 years, is sadly not surprising. I would have liked to there to be a certain grandeur d'esprit, having the ability to not be above it, but to think really rationally about this and not jump into tropes and prejudices, and sadly that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing come out of this debate, which I think is quite sad. And as you said, France has previous for that with the story of the quotas, and which was that was the Direction Technique Nationale. So this was right at the heart of the federation. So obviously, still a lot that needs to come out. That the truth needs to come out, and hopefully we'll get it at some point. But it's to see this population being targeted is sadly not a surprise, I think, in French society at the moment.
And you mentioned how that was the technical direction of the national team and the national academies, and the French Football Federation has since gone on. This is 15 years later, or 10 years later, to cover itself in all sorts of glory at the moment, as well as we've seen, and the huge changes that are sweeping through there. We don't have all the information yet. Surely more light is going to be shined on this topic as well, and we will, of course, keep you up to date. Let's turn our attentions to what happened on the football pitch then. It was first v second on Saturday. It was Paris Saint-Germain entertaining Lens, and calling all the action was Armel Tongi.
Gini couldn't quite bring that one past Marquinhos, and Hakimi caught as he tried to bring the ball out. It's a red card. Salis Abdul Samed shown a straight red by this evening's referee, Willy Delageau. And after an exceptionally strong start from the visitors, they're down to 10 men, and you can understand why. That's a nasty challenge. Loss. Now played 11, a man short as Mbappé turns and opens the scoring. That's a brilliant first-time finish from Kylian Mbappé. Lovely goal, that really is. On the swivel, perfectly into the corner past Brice Samba, and Paris Saint-Germain making their numerical advantage pay. Kylian Mbappé with his 20th goal of the season in Ligue 1, and Paris Saint-Germain now lead by 1-0. And another Parisian corner, this time taken short by Lionel Messi. It's Nuno Mendes. It's worked all the way back for Vitinha. He might strike from distance. He does! He scores! Paris now 2 up thanks to Vitinha. There was a corner that was worked back very deep. Always makes you wonder what they're going to do when it goes all the way back to the deepest player. Vitinha took responsibility. 25 yards out, bending away to his right, away from Brice Samba. He'll be disappointed to have been beaten from there. But Vitinha's first goal for Paris Saint-Germain has the host 2 goals to the good. Messi manages to turn away from Adrien Thomasson. Not once, but twice. Mbappé, that is delightful. Lionel Messi, what a goal! Paris 3 up, and that was a recital. A goal of the highest quality from 2 of the very best players in world football. Lens getting trampled on now. How about this? What a back heel from Kylian Mbappé. Not a bad finish either from Lionel Messi. That is some goal. And PSG 3 clear now before the break, thanks to Lionel Messi's 15th league goal of the season. The Polish international swings in the corner. It's a penalty kick. It's given as handball against Fabian Ruiz, and Lens have got a way back into this game somehow. Well, he heads it onto his arm. Frankowski scores! 3-1 now. And perhaps a lifeline for Francais's men.
Okay, so there's what happened. An early red card, a 3-0 victory for Paris Saint-Germain, some fantastic football. Andreas Evagora, you called the game for PSG TV as well. Before the match, Medina said that Kylian Mbappé might need an ambulance. In the end, it was Salis Abdul Samed who almost meant that Achraf Hakimi needed an ambulance with that red card after 19 minutes. That changed the way the game played out, essentially, because Paris Saint-Germain then went on an absolute blitz. But there was some spectacular football in that opening half.
Yeah, there certainly was, and we've got to say Lens started the game really well. I mean, they completely dominated. I saw a stat that only 10% of the first 20 minutes was played in the Lens third of the pitch. They kept possession. PSG were not really looking to chase the ball. A lot of possession. Samed himself had a good header, forced a very good save from Donnarumma. Then it all changed with that foul. There's been a lot of debate: was it a red card or not? I think on balance, in the modern age, probably yes. The first time you looked at it, it just looked like, well, a bit of a late tackle. But of course, when you look at it on super slow-mos and 96 frames a second and 10 different angles, it suddenly looks like kind of grievous bodily harm. And to be fair, Samed has issued a quite a grovelling apology, actually. He sort of apologised on behalf of his team and his players, and to Ashraf Hakimi, who was on the receiving end of that tackle. But yeah, it changed everything after that. A few heads went down in red and gold after that, which was a bit of a shame. And from PSG's point of view, it kind of summed up their season. They weren't amazing over the 90 minutes. There's a lot of things to work on, but just three, especially two really amazing moments of individual brilliance from Mbappé and Messi. Second goal from Vitinha. Nice to see him finally scoring a goal, but I think Samba will be a bit disappointed that he let that one go in. Second half, again, Lens were pretty good, you know. They created a few chances, got a penalty. But in terms of the big picture, I think that's the title race, if there was one, is certainly over. But I think Lens can take quite a lot from that match. From PSG's point of view, did the job. I think that's probably one of Vitinha's best games for the last 3-4 months, I would say. And again, Mbappé and Messi, when they needed to come up and do something brilliant, they did. That was pretty much the story of the game, and 3-1 it finished.
Baptiste, is that the season over in terms of who's going to be champions? And was there really any doubt? I mean, they came into the game Lens 6 points behind. They could have closed the gap again, just as Marseille had that opportunity a few weeks ago as well. Opportunities that in the end weren't taken. Paris Saint-Germain now 8 points clear of Marseille, who have moved second. Is that it? Are Paris Saint-Germain champions for a record 11th time?
I think so. If I were a betting man, I'd bet quite heavily on PSG. They obviously have that culture of doing the bare minimum, it so appears, and actually it would have, you know, after those first 20 minutes from Lens were really high intensity, high pressure. They were really getting into PSG's face, and PSG couldn't really find an answer, couldn't really get a foothold in the game. It would have been interesting to see that over 90 minutes. I mean, I think they would have maybe tied a little bit as well, Lens, let's be honest. But, you know, them coming back to 3 points with the Galtier stories coming out and the club in disarray would have made things interesting, but I still think their quality would have shown through. And we saw that in the game on Saturday. I mean, ultimately, they were well below par for me during the whole game, PSG, even with one man up in the second half. But when you've got two players like Messi and Mbappé who do connect well together and do link up well, then anything's possible, and they showed it.
JJ, is this result and the idea now that Paris Saint-Germain are almost across the line, does the club start to look towards rebuilding again next season? I mean, is it already time? We know that the Mbappé clan want to have a big say on what happens, that Luis Campos, the pressure on him must be immense. He may be without Christophe Galtier next season because they're just on the pitch, the team hasn't performed well enough. Off the pitch, there have been a couple of massive communication hiccups as well. We all remember the windsurfing to Nantes little comment as well from Christophe Galtier that went down like a lead balloon. JJ, not to rehash the Galtier chat, but can you see wholesale changes now and Paris Saint-Germain just sort of stumbling across the line but getting there?
I can see a major overhaul for PSG, but then again, it's kind of their go-to reaction after, failures season after season. There always seems to be this kind of massive, wave of changes that gets talked about. And then, what we saw last summer, yes, a lot of players got shipped out, but equally, you wouldn't say that it was kind of the sweeping changes that we've known that PSG probably need in terms of, looking at some of the fundamentals, like do PSG have a midfield when Marco Verratti is not fit or, available, those kind of, real deep questions as far as PSG's playing identity is concerned. But I think, if you sort of follow sort of what's been talked about in and around PSG for the last couple of weeks, it sounds like they're already sort of starting to think ahead to next season, even before, these games against the likes of Nice and Lens. Because basically this was just an audition for Galtier to keep his job until the end of the season or until the title has been sewn up, if we believe those reports. And, once again, to echo what Baptiste said, PSG sort of, make the most of the chaos after Lens go a man down, blitz Lens in 9 minutes. But for the rest of it, it kind of just felt like this minimum service. And, on the topic of Mbappé, you had that mini controversy as well, where he basically, sent a very public message to PSG about being used to be the face of the season ticket campaign ahead of next season, which I think, despite the fact that he was railing against this idea that it's Kylian Saint-Germain, I mean, if you really wanted to prove that it is Kylian Saint-Germain, it's exactly the kind of thing that you do, because it feels like it's kind of added more ammunition to that debate than anything else. So, I do think that there is this feeling around PSG that there will be a bigger push to build around Mbappé this summer. With regards to Galtier and Campos as well, I mean, there's even been stories that their relationship is not quite as solid as it used to be, especially after Campos came down pitch side a couple of times, notably away at Monaco and at home to Lille. So it's going to be very interesting to see what PSG do once the title is actually confirmed. I think we can safely assume that Galtier will remain in position until that happens, because it's now just a question of time. But it does sound like we're heading towards a summer where PSG really need to, make some big changes. And knowing that Messi and Ramos are on these contracts that are expiring no closer to any renewals, it does feel like there are going to be some big name casualties at Parc des Princes this summer.
Just following on from Jonathan and this Kylian Saint-Germain, I mean, I agree with it, and at times it really, I think there's a danger of too much noise around Kylian Mbappé. And from the last week, I mean, just the last week, 2 examples from his parents. Wilfried apparently is quite friendly with the father of a 10-year-old boy who's involved in the PSG setup, and this 10-year-old wasn't picked for the under-11s team, right? The under-11s. And Wilfried wasn't happy, so he went to see the team, and apparently they had a chat for an hour. Why wasn't this boy in the under-11s? That may not be that big a deal, but it's an hour of time lost. Kylian's mother was on national television this week, talking about the image rights issue that Jonathan was alluding to, and she said, the final straw was when there was a supermarket that had a cardboard cutout of Kylian Mbappé after France went out of the Euros, saying, we're packing our bags and going home. And she was almost in tears. She was really upset that, her son was subject to this. Now, look, I'm not the father of a global superstar, and I'm sure there's a lot of difficulties if your kid is under this kind of spotlight. But, the fact that a mini market put a cardboard cutout of your son, I think that's just something you have to deal with, if your son's Kylian Mbappé. And these are small things, they're not going to stop PSG winning the league or the Champions League, but I just get the impression there's all these little things going on that do change the focus, and they take the focus away from football, which is, again, agreeing with what Jonathan is saying. There's so much going on around PSG, and when you look at the really successful clubs, I mean, if you look at Man City, which is an obvious comparison, the focus really does seem to be on football 100%. And talking of Man City, there was a big debate about who might replace Galtier, and Sidney Govou over the weekend was saying, look, you've got a choice, the ex-Lyon player, of course. Do you go for a great tactician, or do you go for a leader of men, in his words? Now, there's not many of those in the world, and I think PSG tended to go for the former. Emery, great tactician. He's proving that now. Look what he's doing with Aston Villa. Thomas Tuchel, brilliant tactician, but maybe not a leader of players, right? And does Galtier fit into that first category? And the only one that fits into both, according to Sidney Govou, is Man City's manager, Pep Guardiola, and he's not going anywhere.
That would be the same Man City yet to win the Champions League, if I'm not mistaken, Andreas.
Correct.
Thank you very much for that. Very good. Well, look, let's talk about football now, because no one else has mentioned it. They were 3, you have mentioned it, but 3 stunning goals, and Lionel Messi's goal, the back heel from Kylian Mbappé. Let's just take a moment to enjoy just how superb that was, because it was really breathtaking. I know people will say, but where was it when they played Bayern Munich, when we needed to see that? Lens are a very good side. We're battling, in theory, for the championship. They've got the best defence in the league. And at times, for that 9-minute spell, they were just torn to shreds. And yes, consistency is missing, but that was breathtaking. We saw all of what Mbappé and Messi can do together. I want to draw everyone's attention to one last thing concerning this match, because we have to move on. We've spent far too long on this one of 10 matches. But it was Presnel Kimpembe down on the pitch afterwards with his crutches and his moon boot on, and he sang to the fans, "On les a chicotés," which was, of course, famously what Franck Hez sang to the Lens fans after the victory of Lens, and Paris Saint-Germain got their noses out of joint. A lot of people said, look, it's fine for the fans, it's fine even for the players to sing, but the coach shouldn't go down and sing that song. Essentially, it's a song, and you will have heard it around stadiums around the world now. It goes, oh la la, no, oh le le, oh la la, qu'est-ce qui se passe, on les a chicotés. And it starts as a whisper and then gets louder and louder until the whole stadium is jumping up and down, and the fans and everyone. Now, I went and did a little deep dive just to see where this was from, and I came across some incredibly interesting facts about this chant. The first of which leads us back, the first time chicoté, because there was a lot of thought, what does chicoté actually mean? It basically means whipped. We whipped them. They were whipped. And it comes, the first time it was used in football was by a DR Congo singer, very famous singer called Felix Wazekwa. And it was the football song to celebrate the victory in 2016 in the Chan, not the CAN, not the main footballing tournament in Africa, the secondary one for only local based players, the Chan. The song was called Fimbu na Fimbu, where he sang about how the Congo players had chicotéed everyone. And you'll see when Congo score a goal, the players do this whipping gesture. They chicote the opposition. Now, it was first brought to France, recorded in a Sochaux dressing room after a win in Ligue 2 in 2016. So there you go. It ended up from there traveling to Corsica, where Jean-Louis Laker and Yannick Cahuzac then brought it to Lens in Ligue 2. I'm getting there. Yes, I like that. I've just seen a message in the chat, which I'll get to as well. So, so this song was then brought to Lens, where it took on inside the changing room, was introduced to the fans, and has become such an emblem of Lens after every victory that Jean-Louis Laker, the goalkeeper, and Yannick Cahuzac, the veteran now, created their own clothing label. And now you can buy, and Lens supporters have loads of clothes on the terraces about chicotéing the opposition. And so there you go. It's taken on a whole life of its own. And it comes from, originally, DR Congo. And of course, as JJ has just mentioned in the chat, Presnel Kimpembe is of Congolese origin. So there you go. Perhaps that's why he decided to bring it out and serve it back up cold to the Lens players who were still leaving the pitch as he rushed out with his ruptured Achilles in his moon boot to just return the favor a little bit. Let's hope it doesn't have the same effect on Paris Saint-Germain as it had on Lens, because they went on a terrible run after that night when Francaise sang On les a chicotés to the Lens faithful. So there we go. We're going to close the book on that Paris Saint-Germain versus Lens. Other results very, very rapidly. Monaco 3-1 over Lorient. Lorient's season, which still remains a very respectable one, but they were undone by a Monaco side. Kevin Follon getting back amongst the goals. Wissam Ben Yedder with 2 assists. Golovin with a goal and an assist as well. They now have a 6-point cushion over 5th placed Lille, and they are 2 points behind Lens. So perhaps that battle for second place, Marseille, Lens, and Monaco, is really heating up. They have a tough run, though, Monaco coming up. They've got Lille, Lyon, and Rennes to play in the coming weeks. Speaking of Lille, 2-1 winners over Montpellier. They had to do it tough. They came from behind. Jonathan David getting his 20th goal of the season, so he's level with Kylian Mbappé in that regard. Remy Cabella with a goal and an assist against his former club, so coming from behind and winning that one by 2-1. Another 2-1 result, and again, coming from behind, was Olympique Lyonnais getting up over Toulouse. Lacazette doing fantastic job. I think that's 18 goals for him now this season as well. A fantastic return for him. And all of a sudden, Laurent Blanc, who we were wondering, yes, no, good decision or not. Lyon, who were bundled out of the Coupe de France semi-finals, of course, by Nantes. Massive match coming up for them. Can they still get back into those European places? They're on the charge. They have Olympique de Marseille this weekend We're going to chat about that later as well. Next game on the agenda, Stade Rennais versus Stade de Reims. Andreas Evagora, you were commentating this one. Very trying conditions for a commentator, this one. Let's have a listen first and then discuss another aspect of French society. This is a very cultural episode of Le Beau Jeu today. Here we go. Rennes versus Reims.
Is this going to be the first goal? It is. It's a super start for Rennes, and it's just what they needed after a poor run of form of late. And it's relief more than anything else. A super strike, and Rennes have the lead. Melling, he's got the deflection. There's a real chance for Melling. A rare goal for Melling, maybe. He's put it across, and it's 2-0. A brilliant break from Melling. And the finish from Doku. And this is a dream start for Rennes, who are having a tough time at the moment. But they couldn't have asked for a better start to this match. Great work from Melling in the build-up. He looked across, and that was very unselfish. Looked like he was going to go for the strike, but not one who scores very often, Melling. 2-0 for the hosts. Taking his time. It's a nicely positioned free kick, this one. Bourigeaud against the post. Danger not over. So unlucky, Bourigeaud. Brilliant strike. Couldn't have come closer. So Ito losing it. Chance for a third. And there it is. The defender stayed up for the corner. And Artetier, the last of his 2 goals this term, was against Reims in December. And he's proved again that he knows how to find the back of the net. Artetier making it 3-0, showing a real striker's instinct. It was punched out. Maybe Ito could have cleared his lines. Comes back to Thiat, and there it is. 3-0 with a crafty finish and a good one too.
Okay, Andreas. Now, as we set the scene, as most people know, fans of French football around the world, hopefully, have also taken an interest in France, the country, and its society. There's been massive social unrest for more than a month now in Paris, in all the major cities, right around the country, concerning pushing the age of retirement back before you can get a government pension back another 2 years. It's been met with huge opposition, and this weekend that also included the television broadcast. Andreas, how was it for you, your experience this weekend? What happened?
Well, what happened was I was commentating the game. Unfortunately, I wasn't on site. We should explain. So I was commentating it from Paris. So no saucisses.
Because you couldn't have got a train there, Andreas.
Sometimes we don't go on site. So I couldn't have a galette saucisse that Ian Holyman loves so much. So I was preparing to commentate the match, and all of the technical staff at the last minute, apart from one, were on strike. So the only image I had of the match was from one, what's called a tactical camera, which is quite interesting because it's a camera that is supplying images to coaches, in fact. It's really important for teams. It's not really for broadcast quality. Basically, it was a long, long way away, and I couldn't really see much for the first 15 minutes. But anyway, that's life. Once the game got started, this was a big game for Rennes, because one thing I could see from this camera were huge banners. Rennes fans had these banners saying, basically, you've been rubbish for 3 months. We've been patient for 3 months. Get your act together. And before the match, Olivier Cloirec, the president at Rennes, called the last match at Lyon scandalous, to use his words. I mean, he was really laying into the team and Genesio, who probably the toughest time he's had at Rennes since going to the club. Once things started, Rennes was superb. I mean, they really did get the message from the fans and the president. You know, sometimes these things backfire, don't they? It didn't in this case. They really went for Reims, who have not lost away from home under Will Still until the weekend. So really tough opposition, Reims. But Rennes did extremely well, and Doku finally getting 2 goals. He's only scored 1 goal this season, so he tripled that within about 20 minutes. 2 really good goals. Ugachokru hit the post, Bourigeaud hit the post, Thiat got a third. It really could have been 4 or 5. So all in all, an excellent afternoon for Rennes. It's sort of the Rennes of old, isn't it? I mean, we used to seeing this last season, really good attacking football, nice sunny day in Brittany. So pretty much a perfect afternoon. Let's see if they can carry on for the rest of the season.
And they managed to do it all still without Martin Terrier, of course. Baptiste, Doku, such a talented player. He's been there a couple of years now. We expected this in his first season. He was part of the Belgian national team setup as well. He's an incredibly powerful winger. Those goals, can they help turn his season around? Can they even help turn his career around? Because he was an expensive player. He's been in and out of the squad even a lot since he's been at Rennes. Is it just consistency that's missing, and how far can he go?
I think first and foremost, he's still a young player. I think he's 20 or 21. He didn't have a lot of top flight experience before moving from Anderlecht, and Rennes play a particular system. And I think he's just carrying on his apprenticeship whilst surviving injuries, I think is the way I would look at the last few years. The next step for him obviously is to be more decisive, and that means in my opinion, play more in a more simple manner and just rely on his strength. And I think he's starting to get to that. So, a good run of fitness and maybe just, understanding expectations, what's expected of him on the pitch a bit better, are the next step. And I think it's looking good. He's, I'm looking forward to seeing him having a positive dynamic to end the season, to take him into next year. And I think that's when expectations should be high on him, because he is a real difference maker. But at the moment, he was lacking goals and assists. He's starting to come into his own, and people maybe need to be a little bit patient with players of his ilk as well. And I think that's what Genesio, to his credit, has done over the years. And there's an exciting player there. So I think he's got the real potential to really explode onto the scene next year if he stays fit.
JJ, a side that have been threatening to throw their hat into the European fight. It would be a hugely unlikely one given how this season has unfolded, but it's been one of the fairy tales. Will Still, the coach of Stade de Reims, he said, look, this was just a bad day at the office for this Reims side. He's an exciting coach. Are the wheels just not falling off Reims, but they're just starting to come back a little bit to the field? JJ, how do you see Reims' progression in the last few weeks? That's their second defeat in 4 now.
I mean, I certainly think there's an element of Reims coming back down to earth after some very good form. I don't think that we need to look at sort of those last couple of results necessarily as, sort of the bubble being burst, because it doesn't change the fact that Will Still and this Reims side have done a very, very impressive job. I think if somebody had said when Will Still, first took over for his first game that they might even be in with a shout of being mentioned in the chat for Europe at the end of the season, many people probably would have laughed. So I think it's to his credit and to his players' credit, that they've managed to even get themselves into that position. But when you look at the clubs that are going to be, scrapping it out over the next sort of 6 weeks or so for those European spots, I do think it is unlikely that Reims, sort of break into it. But if they can rediscover that form that they had, in the early days under Will Still and that fantastic run that they went on, then they can't be ruled out, because until somebody like a Lyon or like a Nice finds some consistency, there is going to be sort of that potential to open the door and jump into the European equation in the final couple of weeks. But I do think that there is sort of an element of Reims coming back down to earth now after this, because Will Still has had them punching above their weight. In the last couple of weeks, they've certainly been relying on Balogun goals a lot, especially that late penalty to save a point at home a week or so ago. But equally, like I said before, we can't speak highly enough of what Will Still has managed to do with fairly limited resources with this Reims side. Although I don't think that they'll be in the reckoning for Europe this season, if he stays on, if they manage to find the right player to replace Balogun, who knows for next season? Because, this team, with a full preseason under Will Still, could be quite impressive and a very underrated force next season.
It'll be interesting to see who they can hold on to as well heading into next year, and in particular Balogun. That's the big one. He's been such an impressive player for them up front. Speaking of European football then and potentials, because Rennes are now just 2 points shy of that 5th place now. Nice, who were involved in a thrilling 2-2 draw with Basel. They probably feel that they could have got a better result away to the Swiss side in the first leg, quarterfinals of the Conference League. They play that return leg this coming Thursday at Allianz Riviera. They went down 1-0 to Brest, and it was something of a big match for Eric Roy, who we just heard about, who's a Nice man through and through, basically, who's now head coach at Brest. A 1-0 victory for them. Didier Digard showing his hand a little bit by resting Todibo, Boudaoui, Teremoffi, who scored the most wonderful left-footed bicycle kick against Basel in the first leg of that European match. Catch it if you haven't seen it already. Perhaps, Nice's run in Europe has been the stuff of dreams for that club as well. Unhoped for at the start of the campaign, really, for Nice. And I think that they want to just live that dream the whole way. And whether it means missing out on 5th place in Ligue 1, they're going to give this European run a huge push. So a 1-0 victory for Brest, a big win for Brest as well. Big win it was also for Auxerre. Incredibly big win. That's now 3 on the bounce for them. They have pulled themselves away from the relegation zone where they have been for so much of this return season in the top flight. And it was a win over Nantes by 2-1. This time Nantes, who were 2 goals down as they were the week before, there was no way back for them despite the best efforts of Ludovic Blas. Great win for Auxerre. Angus, our dearly beloved Angus Turode, was spotted streaking across the pitch late in the second half just because he couldn't control himself anymore. No, that's not true, Angus, but he was certainly a very happy man with his team's 3rd win in a row. And perhaps a little bit of safety for them is that Antoine Kombouare's side focusing on the cup. I'm not sure if they'd swap the cup for relegation. Let's see, because there are 4 sides now battling for 1 spot to join the likes of Ajaccio, Angers and Troyes, almost certainly in Ligue 2 next season. 1 spot left at Strasbourg's at the moment, but Nantes are not clear from there either. Clermont got up 2-1 over Angers. Clermont with little left to play for. They are like on an island, I think, in 11th place. They're about 15 points from 10th and about another 15 points from 13th, just sitting in the middle there, waiting. But a good win for Clermont. Strasbourg got up 3-1 over Ajaccio as well. That's precious points for Strasbourg, as I mentioned, who are involved in that hunt to avoid the drop. Not good result for Ajaccio, who are in big trouble. Yuito Suzuki, who arrived from Shimizu S-Pulse in January in the J-League, just 21 years of age, getting the final goal there for Strasbourg. A lovely individual goal it was as well, and a great win for Strasbourg. Okay, one final match to have a look at. It was Marseille versus Troyes, a painful match for any Australian to talk about, as it's been a fairly difficult season. Denis Genreau was involved in the Toulouse game, just by the by. Which was good to see him getting a start up high in left midfield. But this game for Patrick Kisnorbo, the Australian coach of Troyes, was yet another disappointing match for them. Angus Turode was calling the action.
Giving the ball away, though, and all of a sudden they're back in. Vitinha looking to get in. First chance and a goal! Just over a minute into the game. And Vitinha scores his first goal. Man who came in from Braga in the winter transfer window, not to be confused with the one that plays for Paris Saint-Germain. This one's a centre forward, and in his first start with Alexis Sanchez, he gets on the score sheet. There's a good ball in, and there's a goal! And it's Cengiz Ünder, 3rd time of asking. The Turkish international gets his 3rd goal of the season. Quick ball forward as they've been doing through the game. And Cengiz Ünder, who spends more time setting up chances for his teammates, was an awful mess in midfield by Troyes. Ball given away, not for the first time in the first half.
Still in there with Vitinha. Say Kolasinac, not exactly committing many bodies forward. However, they've committed enough. And they've scored again. Vitinha takes the hugs. Great ball in. Really unlucky. Kolasinac hits the woodwork.
And he comes straight into Vitinha, who reacted really sharply. It's been robbed, though, and the chance at the very right of the death here for Troyes. Even that doesn't quite work out. They're still coming, though. Mama Balde still looks up for it. He wants his own little piece of personal glory, and he might get it! Right at the end, Paul Lopez's clean sheet disappears in a puff of smoke. Well, it was the only really fast break and only real urgency we've seen getting forward from Troyes almost in the entire game. Lovely play. Goal number 11 for Mama Balde. The one little piece of light on a very dark night for Troyes.
Jonathan Johnson then. Marseille retaking second spot. A couple of goals for Vitinha, emulating his Parisian namesake. Perhaps that was the little spur he needed as well. If a defensive midfielder with my name is scoring goals in the capital at last, maybe I should get amongst it. What does he bring to the table? And Marseille, we know they've been stumbling. I think there was something like 5 matches without a win at home before this game against Troyes, who have been easy beats of late. They're still in the hunt amazingly. And Marseille, it's such a difficult place to travel. When things are good, it's a fantastic place. We seem to say this every year. When things get bad, it can be a very difficult place as well for Marseille, as much as any other team to travel. Igor Tudor, we know he's a tough man. He won't worry too much about what people on the outside are saying. But Marseille, they're back in second place. Is it theirs to lose?
I do think this is a massive opportunity now for OM to maintain the kind of consistency they need to sew up second place. I think they would have been motivated by the fact that they saw Lens go down in Paris, because they probably would have been sweating it before that Samed red card after 19 minutes, because Lens looked like they might avoid defeat, and then to suddenly get blown apart like that. I'm sure that the Marseille fans found themselves in quite an unfamiliar position of cheering PSG on in that game. But, I think, Vitinha coming into form will be a big help. Getting that win at home, moving back up into second place, that gives, another sort of wave of positivity. And it puts the pressure on Lens now, not to slip up between now and the end of the season, to try and keep that pressure on. Because if Lens do, suffer a little bit of a dip in form like we saw a couple of months ago after they beat PSG, then possibly, that could be enough for Marseille to get this over the line. But I do think that, seeing Vitinha in that kind of form, you can understand a little bit more now why they decided to go big for him in January. I think, first of all, to get the monkey off his back with that first finish was very good. But I actually really liked the second one because of the reaction that he showed in order to steer it in, sort of coming to him at very, very short notice and high speed. So I think Vitinha, if he's that sharp in front of goal between now and the end of the season, could be the difference for them in some of those games, especially the sort of ones that are tough to unlock at home.
Baptiste, Troyes. Patrick Kisnorbo picked up 7 points early on in his reign at the club. They've dropped from 14th all the way down to deep into relegation trouble now. They're cut adrift from safety. For the moment, this experiment hasn't worked. Now, I noticed a little tweet of yours over the weekend about how Troyes are operating, because, and to give some background, they're part of the City Football Group. Of course, Patrick Kisnorbo was a championship-winning coach with Melbourne City in Australia, also part of the CFG, the City Football Group. It's an in-house promotion, if you like, for him, under Eric Mombarts, who was involved in the Melbourne City franchise, if you like, who's returned to be a director of football at Troyes. He's brought in Patrick Kisnorbo. So this Eric Mombarts is a coach with a lot of experience in France. He obviously saw Patrick Kisnorbo as a good fit. How have you seen it? And what do you see is happening at Troyes at the moment? Because they're struggling. I was watching the game. The crowds are small. I mean, it's incredible how when fans see something, or when there's a disconnect between the squad and them, when they don't see themselves, the values reflected and success, they want to be part of something successful as well. There were great scenes when they were promoted back to the top flight. Things are coming apart at the seams there. What's your reading of it?
Well, Troyes are a traditional yo-yo club. I think that has to be, but they tend to do things their own way, and they tend to have a way of going about things. In that sense they're very akin to Norwich in the UK. They try and play good football. They play within their means, and they try their best. Effectively, I think that was the ethos of the club before the City Football Group took over. You know, them taking a punt on Kisnorbo when Bruno Irles had led them to safety quite impressively last year, towards the end of last season, and they were well within the fight to stay up under him, is, you know, to me, smacks of a decision made with the interests of the group rather than the club at mind. And I think that's why we're seeing the disconnect that you're mentioning, Robbie, around the fans. But I have to say, watching the game yesterday, what really struck me was just the lack of appetite from the players. I mean, that was a really damning performance for me, and that struck me as players who don't necessarily play for their coach, but also kind of if the atmosphere around the club just isn't going in a very positive way, then it's very easy to give up. And in that sense, Kisnorbo is a casting error, clearly, but they're sticking by him, and you can understand why fans would be sharing a lot of discontent about that.
I love the use of the very French term casting error. I always enjoy it when there's a signing that hasn't quite worked out, and a player always gets chalked up to being one of those. What I actually find really interesting about the Troyes situation is this is something that extended to the very beginning of the season. There was talk in pre-season that Irles would actually be dismissed. They stuck by him. I saw them come to Paris and perform very admirably before the World Cup break, so I was surprised when he was actually dismissed. But obviously Kisnorbo hasn't worked out, but it just seems to have completely gone to pot, their form since. And it feels like perhaps, many of the members of the squad kind of disagreed with some of the tactics that have been employed by CFG in terms of running the club and the players sort of coming into the team, because quite clearly many of the players who have been sort of farmed out to Troyes are not of the kind of level where you would expect them to go back to Manchester and challenge to be part of City's setup. So I think that there are sort of legitimate questions now in and around this Troyes squad and the fan base, like, what sort of use is that kind of project for CFG if it's not to develop players who are actually seriously going to be able to do something for the main team. So, I do think that should Troyes go down, which unfortunately looks like an increasing probability at this moment in time, given their form, either, CFG have to rethink the way that they, run that project. I don't know, maybe they look to try and bring in somebody, who used to be part of the CFG group, perhaps a Patrick Vieira, somebody like that, who's probably going to need to do a bit of work on his managerial record after his dismissal from Crystal Palace, or do CFG perhaps, maybe cut their losses with Troyes? Because to be honest, it hasn't really felt like there's ever been any clear strategy with CFG and Troyes since the very beginning. And I kind of got the sense that they would be one of those clubs that were a ticking time bomb this season after you heard those suggestions that Irles was very close to the door in the summer.
I agree with Jonathan. I mean, Bruno Irles did a fantastic job for me. As you're saying, Baptiste, he took them up, played some good football, scored a lot of goals. I think they were 13th, 14th when he was fired. I know he's got a certain character, hasn't he, Bruno Irles? He's like a TV personality guy, that kind of thing. But look, he got the results. And I think there have been, 10, 11 managerial changes in Liga. That has to be the worst decision, right, this year in Liga, to fire Bruno Irles. I would say that, put that out there. In terms of the attitude on the pitch, Adil Rami was very critical of his younger teammates before the game. He was saying, look, he said something along the lines of, I'm at the end of my career, I'm doing my best and I'm playing with these kids who don't seem to care, which is a terrible indictment on the side who were lost. I mean, the second goal was comical. It was, Under was there about maybe 10 meters from the goal, and our defenders were running away from him, including Rami, including Salmier. I mean, it really was very, very poor. The only bright spark for Troyes is Mama Balde, who I'm very impressed with. I think he's going to be playing in Ligue 1 next year. Troyes definitely won't.
Okay, I want to bring up. Well, we're not going to continue turning the knife into poor old Patrick Kisnorbo at the moment. I will say that he is a very strict coach, and he has a fantastic relationship with his players back here in Australia. They would run through walls for him as well. He's a He's a man motivator. We were talking about those coaches between a tactician and a motivator. And I suspect, as much as anything, when you have that alpha male coach in a dressing room who's trying to highly motivate with forceful words and an aggressive mentality his players, if there's a language problem there as well, that can just sound like noise and be bouncing off. And I know there are foreign players as well, but there are lots of French players and Francophone players in that side. And I heard early on that language was definitely a problem within that changing room. But like I say, Patrick Gisnorbo, you talk to his players here and players who have come from the Premier League, players who have come at the moment. Melbourne City has Valon Berisha, who was at Stade de Reims for the last 2 years, the former Lazio player. He's there at the moment. Loved him. So he when he can plug into the player, into the brain, and get that connection, he's capable of doing fantastic things, but it certainly hasn't worked for the moment at Troyes. To come back to Marseille very quickly, because if there's been a problem with Marseille in recent years, and we were talking about the pressure that can build on you in that home stadium, JJ, I'll go to you first. Let's keep this and bounce it around, guys, with a few names. But I was chatting to producer Stephen just before the game and just before the podcast, and about the last great number 9 for Marseille, because they've been struggling with goals. When you're a great number 9 for Olympique de Marseille, you really are king of the world. Now, even if it can last a very short amount of time, which for some it had, Dario Benedetto, for example, was maybe, 65 minutes of one game early on in his career, he was king of the world and must have thought...
Still Matt Spiro's favourite player, though.
Well, there you go. Well, Matt Spiro is another that is caught under the spell of Olympique de Marseille and those amazing nights. He must have commentated a Dario Benedetto diving header in one of those early games. But JJ, how hard is it to be that number 9? And for you, I mean, Andre Pierre Gignac is probably one that comes immediately to mind as one of the more recent ones. But there's been Milik. There are players, Benedetto, obviously, but now Vitinha, players that just haven't been able to shoulder that responsibility. And look how long it's taken someone like Alexis Sanchez, for example, just to feel like this is his role.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I would certainly say that in terms of the last great number 9, a real proven predatory goal scorer, I would say that it has to be Gignac. But Gignac's story, like leading up to success in Marseille, is, it perfectly illustrates how difficult it is to establish yourself there, because he had so many run-ins with managers and came so close to leaving the club before ultimately really turning himself around and making himself an almost legendary figure with the OM fan base, under Bielsa. I think it's really so much at Marseille depends on not just the player and their ability to sort of make a connection with the crowd and feed on that crazy frenetic energy that gets built up in the Velodrome, but also to have a coach who recognizes the players that have that potential. And when that all sort of comes together in the melting pot, then it can be quite potent. But equally, sort of that kind of environment can easily eat up a player. Very able players, players with fantastic goal scoring ability, like Milik. I know was a kind of a source of frustration because he didn't get used as much as he thought he was capable of playing. Obviously, he's a player who had injury issues as well, so I don't really doubt the profile of the player. Just he didn't quite, catch fire in the way that we, maybe knew that he could if he was deployed differently by a different type of coach. So for me, I'd certainly say it was Gignac. I don't know if Baptiste or Andreas, have any other sort of candidates to throw out there. But I feel that Gignac's story certainly shows how you really have to fight to earn your place at Marseille, certainly in a position of great responsibility, like being the number 9.
Yeah,
Baptiste has just put into the chat. Hang on, Andreas.
Sorry, go ahead.
Baptiste has just put in the attack. Grand attaquant, yeah. Which is the well. I'll get you to say it with your best Marseille accent, but that's a big attacker in French with the Marseille accent, and obviously you must be talking about Didier Drogba as the archetypal there, the man that played one season at Marseille and is still considered a legend.
Yeah. I mean, for Marseille, it's a combination of things. I think obviously it's rabid fan base with a goldfish memory. So you're only as good as your last game, effectively, and you throw in a little bit of early 90s Tapi Champions League nostalgia, where you had Jean-Pierre Papin, Rudy Voller, and all these guys, and anybody who's going to wear the number 9 shirt is going to
Alan Boksic,
is going to face those expectations. So I agree with. I think the mention of Gignac, who had to face a lot of hostility for a long time, and Drogba are probably the two that come to mind. Mamadou Niang as well, maybe was not seen in the same stratosphere, but was actually a very, very serviceable player for a number of years. But I think it's when you combine all those elements, that's why it makes it difficult for a player. And actually, that rabid fan base also wants to see players not just be good, but actually care and kind of get the Marseille ethos. And I think that's what Drogba sort of got, really. He got he seized moments, and he got, he took games by the scruff of the neck, which actually Gignac in a way kind of didn't, and that's why Drogba is more revered. That Marseille fans want to see that. They want to see players step up and take ownership and take responsibility, and that's that's very, very demanding, but that's what makes Marseille what it is.
I agree with Baptiste, and it is such a hard place to play year in, year out and be consistent. I just had to check again. Drogba did play one season at Marseille. It's amazing because you associate him so much, but he had that amazing European run, didn't he? When Marseille got to I think it was UEFA Cup final, wasn't it? We haven't mentioned Ravanelli, because he was a person that's going back a few years. I know Robbie, but Ravanelli was pretty successful, and I always remember an English journalist asking him, why are you changing Middlesbrough for Marseille? Why would you do such a thing? And it's like, well, anyone who's been to those cities will probably understand Marseille is a kind of nicer city than Middlesbrough. Nothing against that fine northern city. But yeah, I'll throw Ravanelli in there as another great, but again, short-lived. I think it was a couple of seasons. In terms of consistency over many years, yeah, I think Jonathan's right with Gignac right up there.
Yeah, I think maybe when you talk about those that have really, Gignac did, and I think Gignac was a fantastic goal scorer for them, but you have to have some success, don't you? I think Mamadou Niang is probably revered in Marseille because he brought the title there. He with El Comandante. It was them that won the league for Marseille. That combination, those two, was brilliant. Djibril Cissé also played there, but didn't have much success, as you said, Andreas. Didier Drogba took them to that final. I think it was Valencia, where Fabien Barthez gave away the penalties early on. Was he sent off as well?
Yeah, early on. It was a penalty and a standing off.
Very early on.
Yeah, unlucky.
Yeah, and I think Didier Drogba was injured as well after the heroics against Newcastle. Kamel Merriam was in that squad as well. It was a great run, but you've got to have those legendary moments that build your name as well. I was talking to Jean-Pierre Papin a couple of years ago about his history with Marseille and the fact that he lost a Champions League final with them. Well, he lost with Marseille. No, in fact, I don't think he was there. Yes, he was there in '91. He was there because he'd been on loan at Bordeaux as well. But he lost one. Then he won one with
Milan. Yeah.
Milan lost. No, so hang on. I'm going to get the story right. He transferred away from Marseille to AC Milan and then lost that Champions League final to Marseille in 1993. And then the next year they won it again. So got there in the end. There are some great names coming up in the chat of Marseille. Number 9s as well. Tuafilu Maolida, the man that used to have the little message in his shin pad each time he scored a goal as well that he'd bring out. But Jean-Pierre Papin told me that when he first arrived at Marseille, it was an absolute nightmare and he almost buckled under the pressure. And they called him, his nickname later, of course, became Le Papinade for his incredible goals, and JPP, as he was known. And JPP, when he first arrived at Marseille in the first 6 months, was J'en peux plus. And all the fans would call him J'en peux plus, which is, we can't take it anymore. JPP, J'en peux plus. And he almost left. He almost left Marseille, never to return. He stuck it out. He said he worked on on hitting these volleys and thought this is the only way I'm going to get out of it is just by my technique and hang it all on that. And in the end, it worked. So fantastic history lesson. We've had it all in this episode of Le Beau Jeu, and we're just about done. But one of the other big moments you've all been waiting for is coming right up. Don't forget to join the conversation at Ligue1_ENG on Twitter. Email us your questions, your comments about the pod to Ligue1podcast@gmail.com. Like, subscribe, follow, recommend the podcast on your favorite platform. Now it's time for our weekly chance for you to go into the draw to win a Ligue 1 jersey. It's the Who Am I? I've written a small novel about this week's clue as well. Last week's, a few people got it, not many. It was tough. I realized that there were very few clues, and the people that got it right, hats off, because I think you must have taken a little bit of a stab in the dark, but there were some that got it correct. This one, a return to form, but a complicated one, I suspect. This is Déjà Who. Who am I? A France international, I grew up playing for my hometown club, but after making my Ligue 1 debut, I was loaned out the following season, eventually named in the Ligue 2 Team of the Year, before another loan deal followed, this time in Ligue 1 12 months later. I made it all the way to the Coupe de la Ligue final. A third consecutive loan deal saw me head off for a first overseas experience. And at the end of another promising campaign, so a third consecutive season out on loan, I finally returned to my hometown club and started playing regular football, although perhaps never truly first choice. And I was soon back on the road. I actually won 4 consecutive league titles in 3 years across 2 different countries, as well as tasting international success. The loan deals then continued, taking me to 2 new clubs and a 3rd country, and perhaps now in 2023, with a permanent deal signed and in my breast pocket, I will finally get my hands on some continental silverware. Who am I, and which are the clubs I have actually signed permanent contracts with in my decade-long professional career? So there you go. We got there in the end. If you think you know who that is, send your answers via email to Ligue1podcast@gmail.com. It's a tough one. I'm just seeing in the chat if anyone's put anything in there. I'm still seeing Tuafilu Maulida's name as the last option in the chat, so I don't think it was him. Lads, Andreas?
What, can I clarify? You were saying I'm hoping for European silverware like this.
Now, this very season.
He's looking for European.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that narrows it down. Okay, that will help us. I still don't know what it is, but at least I can think about it.
Excellent. And we have 2 other answers in the chat, which I'm not going to say anything more about or ask you 2 gentlemen who you think it was, because I think you could be spot on with that one. Next up, we're going to take a look at what's coming up this weekend in Ligue 1, round 32 of the season. Angers against Paris Saint-Germain. Angers, who can be officially relegated with 6 matches to spare. If they lose to Paris Saint-Germain, is there going to be any generosity of spirit or perhaps inconsistencies that we've come to recognize in the French champions of late? We'll have to wait and see. Auxerre take on Lille, Lens Monaco, Reims Strasbourg, Ajaccio Brest in another battle of fear. Lorient Toulouse for the mid-tablers. Nantes versus Troyes. Surely we're getting to the last chance for L'Estaque and Patrick Kisnorbo against FC Nantes. Perhaps one eye on the Coupe de France final, which is coming up very quickly as well. Nice versus Clermont, Montpellier versus Rennes, and then the final match of the round, a big one, the Olympique Lyonnais against Olympique de Marseille. It's time for a bon voyage. We'll start with alphabetical order. Andreas Evagora, where are you headed this weekend and why?
I would head north to Lens, because I respectfully disagree with Jonathan. I think Jonathan thought that Marseille were favourites for second. I still think it's Lens because they're still going to. I was looking at their programme this morning. They're still home to Monaco, home to Marseille, home to Ajaccio. I really was impressed with Lens at the weekend for the first 20 minutes, and I'm very interested to see how they'll do against Monaco. You never quite know what you're going to get with Monaco. That they were very good at the weekend, so I'll head north. It'll be a very good atmosphere and a very important, not decisive match because I think we use that word too much, but a very important match to see who's going to get that second place. I think Lens will, and I think I'd go to Lens this weekend. I think that's going to be a great match.
I used decisive right at the top of the program, Andreas. Perhaps I was talking about this podcast, a decisive podcast in the history of Le Beau Jeu. Baptiste, you're next. I'm going alphabetical order on first names as well, by the way, JJ, which is why you're coming up in third place. Baptiste, where and why?
I mean, the Olympico, you can't get away from that. That's always a spicy game, especially with what's happened over the last few years with Payet being hit on the head with a bottle. It's always, it's always got a special atmosphere, and Lyon are in a good run of form, so I think they will try and put a spanner in the works. For a slightly more niche, I'm quite intrigued by Lorient-Toulouse. That seems like quite a fun game to go to. Two good football playing sides. Get some galette saucisse at Lorient and some crêpes, and you're having a good day if it's good weather.
Absolutely. You have to wait before you get back into your cassoulet and your duck down in Toulouse for a return leg there. Maybe after a Coupe de France victory, because that's what they must have a couple of eyes on as well, on the big prize Toulouse. It's been, my goodness, the last time Toulouse pulled down silverware. I can't think of it. JJ, where are you off to?
It's interesting that you mentioned the Coupe de France because I was tempted to go west to see if the Nantes fans agree with Antoine Comboire's summary of his team's effort, because he was on side with the fans in their criticism, agreeing that the team were expletive on the pitch over the weekend against Auxerre. But I think if I really had to choose a game outside of the picks that have already been made by Andreas and Baptiste, I would actually go for Montpellier-Rennes, because I think if Rennes can get the consistency together that we were talking about earlier, I think they are, still in with a good shout of finishing in the European places. And I do think that Rennes would be one of the better teams positioned, to compete next season if they do qualify. So I've got my fingers crossed for them there. And Montpellier, fantastic place to wander around, have some great food, great drink as well. So it's, especially in the good weather, it's a very nice place to be.
I found out on a trip down to Montpellier once that they are great producers of Muscat, which is a sweet white wine, which is a fantastic drop as well, and can give you a terrible hangover. So don't drink too much of it, but it is a fantastic thing. Muscat from Montpellier. Nobody mentioned Ajaccio. Now, Brest, to get to Ajaccio, that's one hell of a trek for those away fans who are going to try and get there. Keep in mind, you have to leave Ajaccio from a 3:00 kickoff midway through the second half to get the last ferry back to Marseille to ensure that you're back home in Brest to work the next morning. So you travel all that way. You rarely get to see the full 90 minutes anyway. And more often than not this season, it's been a victory for your side as well. But Ajaccio, the weather must be spectacular down there this time of year, just warming up nicely for a nice bit of a spring day.
You would use your private jet,
now,
wouldn't you, Robbie?
Gentlemen.
Honestly. Come on.
Exactly. Or, well, yeah, I guess so. Are Brest supporters known for their private jets?
None that I know.
I could, of course, use my private jet. Absolutely. No, brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming on the show today. Don't forget, people listening at home, like, subscribe, promote, leave a rating, share us with your mates, get everyone listening. Follow us on Twitter on the official channels. Don't forget, there's videos on Ligue1.com as well, and all the latest Ligue 1 news. There's player profiles, match reports, match previews, feature stories on Ligue1.com. All you need to know to follow your favorite team, or just hear about the latest craziness surrounding Paris Saint-Germain and Olympique de Marseille. That's the way it is every week in France. Gentlemen, I won't do individual goodbyes. I'll just get you all to wave at the screen as we say goodbye. Thank you very much for joining me. Next week, Ian Holyman will be back in the hot seat, and we will have all the wrap of round 32 of the Ligue 1 season from Robbie Thomson, Jonathan Johnson, Baptiste Reynaud, and Andreas Evagora. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
And Messi again. This time maybe Messi's done it.